You ever get a job that feels disconnected? Not just from people, but from reality itself. That's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. The company is called Harmonic Geodynamics. Sounds impressive, but I guarantee you've never heard of it. Nobody has. My job title is subacoustic monitor. I work the night shift, alone, in a windowless facility that looks like a forgotten municipal water plant. My entire job is to watch a bank of monitors. Each monitor displays a zone. There are 12 zones in total, scattered across the region. They look like seismic graphs, just squiggly lines. My supervisor, a guy named Harris who I only ever talked to via a crackly internet phone, told me my job was simple. Keep the lines in the green, he said. The harmony, that's what they call the signal, has to remain stable. If it drops into the red, you calibrate it. If it goes flat, you call me. Do not investigate. The signal itself is inaudible. It's infrasound. Deep, deep bass that you feel more than you hear. Harris said it was for long-term structural integrity testing of the continental shelf. I'm not a geologist, but that sounded like high-level corporate nonsense. Still, the pay was astronomical. 6 figures to watch lines wiggle and press a calibrate button every few hours. I didn't ask questions. For 3 years, it was the easiest job in the world. Just me, the hum of the servers, and the cold, recycled air. The lines would dip, I'd calibrate. They'd spike during a minor earthquake, I'd log it. Easy. Then, last Tuesday, it happened. It was 3:17 a.m. I was half dozing, my coffee cold. A proximity alert chimed, a soft, polite ding. I looked up. It wasn't one of the graphs. It was the feed for Zone 7. Zone 7 is weird. It's the only zone that isn't just a graph. It also has a single high-contrast thermal camera feed. The feed points at an empty field somewhere out in the plains. It's always empty, just a flat, dark stretch of nothing, glowing faintly cold. But it wasn't empty now. At the very edge of the camera's range, something was standing. It was tall, impossibly tall. It was stark white on the thermal camera, meaning it was radiating intense cold, not heat. And as I watched, frozen, it took a step. The exact same instant, the graph for Zone 7 didn't just drop into the red. It flatlined. It went completely silent. And the hum in the building, the hum I hadn't even realized was always there, the hum I monitored, stopped. The silence that replaced it was terrifying. Felt wrong. Felt hollow. I picked up the intranet phone to call Harris. My hand was shaking, but there was no dial tone. There was nothing. I was staring at the monitor, at this towering, freezing thing in the field. And then it turned. It wasn't looking at the camera. Felt like it was looking right at me. My breath fogged in front of my face. The air in the control room, usually kept at a stable, cool 68 degrees, had plummeted. I could feel the cold radiating out of the monitor for Zone 7, as if the screen itself were a block of dry ice. The figure just stood there, motionless, freezing, staring. I tore my eyes away from it and slammed my thumb onto the red call button for Harris. Again and again. Dead. The intranet was offline. My cell phone? I ripped it from my pocket. No service. It always had service here. I had a small extender plugged into the wall. I looked at it. The little green active light was dark. Everything was dark. The main lights were still on, running on some internal power, but all the Harmony equipment was offline. I looked back at the main bank of monitors. Zone 7 was still flatlined, but the others, Zones 1 through 6 and 8 through 12, they weren't flat. They were no longer the chaotic, squiggly lines of geologic noise. They were all moving in perfect, slow sinusoidal waves. Identical, synchronized. It was hypnotic. And it was impossible. These sensors were hundreds of miles apart. They couldn't possibly be reading the same signal. Unless the signal wasn't coming from the ground anymore. Unless the signal was the system itself crying out. Then the figure on the Zone 7 feed vanished. It didn't walk away. It didn't fade. It was there 1 millisecond, and the next, the feed was just the empty, cold field again. As if it had never been. No, no, no. I whispered, my voice sounding incredibly loud in the dead silent room. And that's when I heard it wasn't a sound from the speakers. It was a sound from the building. From the thick, concrete-lined hallway behind me, a low, deep resonance. A vibration I felt in the soles of my shoes. It was like the infrasound harmony was trying to start back up. But wrong. It wasn't the clean, stable hum. It was a stuttering, wet thump. Thump. A pause. Thump. It was the sound of something immense, impossibly heavy, trying to shift its weight. And it was coming from deeper inside the facility. From a place I had never been. A place the blueprints on the wall called sublevel maintenance. A place I didn't even know had an entrance. Thump. It wasn't just a sound. I felt it in my sternum. It was a pressure wave that seemed to suck the air out of the room, just for a split second, before returning it. The room was so cold now that my teeth were chattering. My eyes darted to the facility schematic screwed to the wall next to the fire extinguisher. It was a simple, boring blueprint. My control room, the small server room next door, a bathroom, a long corridor to the exit, and behind the server room, a large, blank square labeled sublevel maintenance. I had always assumed the door was in the hallway. I'd been up and down that hallway 1,000 times. There was no door. Thump. It was closer, louder. The vibration ran up the concrete floor and into the legs of my chair. I grabbed the heavy-duty mag light from its charging cradle on the wall. Its beam cut a clean, white circle in the dim, cold air. I walked slowly to the door connecting my office to the server room. The humming was gone, but the thumping was replacing it. I opened the door. The server room was a cave. Usually, it was a hurricane of fan noise and blinking green lights. Now it was dead silent. All the server racks were dark, save for a few random red error LEDs blinking in an irregular, frantic pattern. And it was freezing. The air was visibly smoking. Frost was creeping up the metal legs of the server racks. The back wall of the server room was solid, poured concrete. No seams, no hinges, no handle. Just a stark, gray, freezing wall. I stepped forward. The thump now a palpable presence. I reached out a trembling hand and pressed my palm flat against the concrete. It was impossible maintain level. Not just cold. It was vibrating. I snatched my hand back. Not from the cold, but from the feeling. Beneath the deep, bassy thump, I felt something else. A high frequency, scratching, like thousands of tiny needles dragging themselves across the other side of the concrete. I scrambled back, tripping over a power conduit, and fell into the main control room, slamming the server room door shut. I leaned against it, breathing hard. Then, a new sound. A high-pitched, digital shriek, like a fax machine dying. It was coming from my console. The intranet phone, the dead one. The call light was flashing. Not red, but a sick, pale purple I had never seen before. The speaker was emitting that agonizing digital noise. I crept towards it. The noise wasn't random. It was a pattern. And beneath the static, there was a voice. It was garbled, processed through a nightmare of static, but I recognized it. It was Harris. It wasn't a live call. It was a recording playing on a loop. The same 4 words, over and over, distorted by the screaming static. The anchor is loose. Close the channel. The anchor is loose. Close the channel. My eyes shot to the bank of monitors. The 11 synchronized sine waves. They were still moving, but they weren't just waving anymore. The amplitude of each wave was growing. Slowly, steadily, in perfect unison. The lines were getting taller, reaching for the top and bottom of their displays. The signal was getting stronger, and I had a terrible, sinking feeling that closing the channel was the opposite of calibration. Close the channel? How? I yelled at the console. The repeating, static shredded voice of Harris was a maddening loop in the freezing air. I scanned my interface. There was no close button. There was calibrate, log, and system reset. I had hit reset a dozen times. Nothing happened. The system was locked, focused only on the 11 screaming signals. Those signals, the waves were no longer waves. They were solid blocks of red, filling their displays from top to bottom. Signal overload flashed in unison across all 11 screens. The pressure in the room was building, a low-frequency thrum that made my vision blur at the edges. I frantically clicked through digital folders on my terminal, archives I'd never had a reason to open. Emergency protocols, maintenance overrides, geodynamic theory. They were all locked, password protected. Behind me, the scratching from the server room stopped. A new sound replaced it. A sound like a giant's knuckle dragging slowly, deliberately, down the entire length of the concrete wall. A deep, grinding scrape that sent vibrations through my feet. And I looked at the server room door. A tiny puff of gray dust exploded from the top of the doorframe. The wall was being moved. Harris! I screamed at the useless phone. What's the password? The looping message just played on. The anchor is loose. Close the channel. I have to find a manual override. I ripped my desk drawers open, throwing logbooks and old takeout menus onto the floor. Nothing. I ran to the wall-mounted schematic. I stared at it, my eyes tracing every line, looking for something I'd missed in the bottom right corner. In tiny, almost unreadable print, was a key legend. PSU, Primary Support Unit. EC Access Corridor. ECS Emergency Channel Shutdown. Next to ECS was a symbol. A small, physical key. A key. Not a password. A physical key. Harris never gave me a key. Crack. The sound was deafening. Came from the server room. It wasn't a thump this time. It was a final, brittle snap, like a 1,000-year-old tree splitting in a winter storm. The server room door didn't just open. It imploded. It was sucked inward, torn from its steel hinges as if by a massive vacuum. It vanished into the darkness of the server room, followed by a rush of air that pulled papers off my desk and sent my coffee mug shattering against the console. I was thrown against the wall, my head striking the schematic. The air was gone, sucked out. My lungs burned. Then, as quickly as it began, the pressure equalized, and air rushed back in, howling past my ears. I staggered to my feet, gagging. The server room was gone. Where the door and the racks of blinking servers had been, there was now just a hole. A perfect 5 by 5 foot square opening in the concrete. The edges were not broken. They were smooth, as if the concrete had been surgically dissolved. It wasn't a room. It was a tunnel leading straight down into a blackness so complete it seemed to drink the light from my maglite. And the cold wasn't just cold anymore. It was a living thing. It was an absence. It poured from that hole like a physical, black liquid, clinging to the floor. Frost was instantly forming a perimeter around the opening, spreading out like fractal ice on a windshield. The intranet speaker shrieked one last time. The loop was broken. Harris's voice came through, but it was horrifyingly slow, stretched out, a digital ghost. Tried to contain the frequency is a door. A pause, filled with a sound like wet wind. Aren't the ones listening? We are the signal. Then, from the absolute blackness of the hole, a new sound. Not a thump, Not a scrape, a wet, rhythmic clicking, like massive, smooth stones being tapped together. Click, clack, click. It was getting closer. It was coming up. Click, clack, click. It was a damp, heavy sound, like polished obsidian marbles the size of bowling balls, tapping against each other. It was slow, patient, and climbing that I scrambled backwards, my maglite beam fixed on the perfect, 5-foot square of absolute nothing. The cold was so intense it was painful, a deep, burning ache in my skin. My flashlight beam didn't illuminate the tunnel. The darkness just seemed to consume the light a few feet in. Close the channel. Harris's mangled voice echoed in my head. The key. The ECSI tore my eyes from the hole and slammed my gaze back to the schematic on the wall. The symbol for the emergency channel shutdown. Where was it? It wasn't marked on my console. It wasn't by the door. My eyes traced the blueprint. The symbol wasn't in my room, or the server room, or the bathroom. It was in the hallway, the main corridor, a small X right next to the main breaker panel about 20 feet from my office door. Click, clack. The sound was louder. It was no longer coming from down. It was coming from within the hole just below the floor level. It had arrived that I didn't have the key. I ran to my desk, sweeping everything off it. I ripped the drawers out and dumped them. Pens, old manuals, snack wrappers. No key. I checked the fire extinguisher case. Nothing. The breaker box in my room? Just switches. Where is it, Harris? Where did you put it? I hissed, panic rising in my throat like bile. The clicking stopped. The silence that followed was 1,000 times worse. The only sound was the frantic thump of my own heart and the crackling of frost as it spread across the floor from the hole. The ice was now halfway across the room, a creeping white death. And then, a new sound. A slow, wet slur. It was the sound of something unimaginably heavy and soft, dragging itself over the smooth edge of the hole that I didn't look, couldn't. I kept my back to it, my hands braced on the console. I was trapped. The hole was behind me. The only exit was in front of me. But the lock was in the hallway. I pounded my fist on the console in desperation. Think! My knuckles hit the underside of the desk, and I felt it. Not wood, not plastic. A small, square patch of duct tape. My fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the tape. It was brittle, frozen. I tore it off. A single, heavy, cold piece of metal fell into my palm. It wasn't a normal key. It was a triangular piece of steel, like a tool for a high-voltage cabinet. I had the key. I spun around, pointing the mag light at the hole. There was nothing there, just the empty, black square. The slurping sound was gone. The clicking was gone. For a second, I felt a wave of dizzying relief. Had I imagined it? Then I heard it again. Click, clack. It wasn't coming from the hole. It was coming from the hallway. Outside my office door. My blood turned to slush. That wasn't possible. The hole was behind me. The only door to the hallway was in front of me. I was between them. It couldn't be out there. Click, clack. It was a slow, measured, heavy sound, tapping on the linoleum floor of the corridor. It sounded wet. I backed away from the door, my body pressed against the console. The bank of 11 monitors, still screaming their signal overload, cast a flickering, hellish red light across the room. The hole in the server room was a void, a patch of absolute black, still breathing out impossible, painful cold. I was trapped. The hole behind me, the thing in front of me. My eyes darted to the office door. It was a standard, heavy-duty fire door with a small, wired glass window at eye level. I had never looked through it. The hallway was just a hallway. Click, clack. It was right outside the door. Then silence again. A heavy, listening, patient silence. My hand, clutching the triangular key, was shaking so violently I could barely hold it. I had to know. I had to see. I took one step, then another. The frost from the hole was now covering half the control room floor, crackling under my boots like broken glass. I reached the door. The metal of the handle was so cold it stung my skin. I didn't touch the handle. I raised my head, slowly, until my eyes were level with the small window. At first, I saw nothing. Just the familiar, sterile white corridor, lit by the buzzing fluorescent tubes. The main breaker panel was there 20 feet to the left. The ECS lock was a small, triangular hole right beside it. "It's gone," I breathed. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. It was just in my head. Then I saw it wasn't a creature. It was a wrongness. The air in the hallway, near the breaker panel, was shimmering. It was rippling, like the air above a hot road, but it was giving off waves of visible, freezing fog, and the light from the fluorescent tubes was bending around it, as if it were passing through a lens made of black water. As I watched, a long, thin, oily black something uncoiled from the center of that shimmering distortion. It wasn't a tentacle. It was a joint, like the leg of an obsidian insect, impossibly long and thin. It slowly touched the wall right next to the breaker panel. Click. It tapped the wall. The sound was sharp, brittle. Tapped again. Clack. It was testing the wall, feeling it. And then it slid. It didn't bend. It just slid into the wall, disappearing through the solid drywall as if it were smoke. A second later, I heard it. Click. Scratch. It was inside the walls. I jumped back from the door. The sound was no longer in the hallway. It was all around me, in the ceiling, in the floor. It was a dry, rapid skittering, punctuated by the heavy clicks. It was moving through the building's infrastructure, through the conduits, through the vents. "The frequency is a door," Harris's voice echoed in my head. I looked at the bank of monitors. The 11 solid red blocks of signal overload suddenly snapped off. For 1 second, they were black. Then they all lit up, not with a wave, but with a new image. It was the thermal feed. The feed from Zone 7, the empty field. But the camera was no longer looking at the field. It was on the ground, pointing up at the towering, freezing white figure I had seen before. It was standing directly over the camera. It was leaning down. It was looking into the lens. And on all 11 screens, its face, a smooth, featureless porcelain white mask of cold, filled the entire display. The speakers on my console, dead for an hour, burst to life. Not with static, not with Harris's voice, but with a sound that shattered the air. A deep, wet, resonating click that came from all 11 speakers at once. A perfect, deafening synchronization of the sound that was already in my walls. The click from the speakers was a physical blow. It hit me like a sonic punch, rattling my teeth and making me stagger. The sound didn't stop. It began to loop, a deafening, rhythmic, percussive click, click, click that hammered the air. Simultaneously, the skittering in the walls went insane. It was no longer one thing. It was dozens. It sounded like a colony of giant, glass-legged spiders had been unleashed within the drywall. Moving with frantic, impossible speed, that I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing. The sound was in the bone. Cracks began to spiderweb across the wall panels. Not normal cracks. They were black and oily, and a fine, dark, magnetic-looking dust was puffing out of them, staining the white paint. The room was a cacophony of shattering speakers, cracking plaster, and the sound of skittering, glassy legs. I looked back at the hole in the server room. The absolute blackness within it was pulsing. It was contracting and expanding like a massive square pupil. With every click from the speakers, the hole would exhale a new, visible wave of black fog and agonizing cold. The frost was no longer creeping. It raced across the floor and up the walls, a living, crystalline tide, instantly covering everything it touched in a thick, white rime. I was going to be frozen solid or buried alive. The key! I gasped, my breath a thick cloud. The hallway, the lock. I had to move, now. The creature was in the walls, but the distortion, the door it came through, was in the hallway. I had to get to that panel. I grabbed the triangular key, my numb fingers barely able to hold it. I snatched the mag light from the frozen desk. I took a deep breath that seared my lungs. Then I ran. I threw my full weight against the office door. It flew open with a bang, and I stumbled out into the corridor, my boots sliding on the linoleum. The hallway was different. The normal fluorescent lights were still on, but they were flickering wildly in time with the clicks coming from my office. The air was freezing, but the source of the cold wasn't just my office anymore. It was the distortion. The shimmering, rippling lens in the air 20 feet away, right next to the breaker panel, was still there, but it was no longer small. It was now a gaping, 9-foot-tall oval of pure, swirling unreality. It pulsed with a faint, sick, purple light, the exact same color as the call light on Harris's dead phone. It was humming, a deep, resonant tone that harmonized with the clicks. That I was about to sprint for the panel when I froze. There was someone standing in front of it. It was a man. He was wearing the same gray harmonic geodynamics uniform as Harris, the same one I wore. His back was to me. He was standing perfectly, unnaturally still. His head tilted up as if he were admiring the swirling purple hole. "Harris," I whispered, my voice cracking. The skittering in the walls stopped. The clicking from my office speakers cut off. Absolute silence fell, broken only by the low, wet hum of the purple distortion. The man in the uniform did not turn around, but his head slowly, impossibly began to rotate. It twisted on his neck with a sound like wet leather and popping gravel. 180 degrees. He was still facing the distortion, but his head was now looking directly at me, upside down. It wasn't Harris. It was a face. But it was wrong. It was smooth, gray, and featureless, except for two perfectly round, perfectly black, wet-looking holes where his eyes should have been. And it opened a mouth that wasn't a mouth, a vertical black slit that ran from its chin to its hairline. And from that slit, a single polished black insectoid leg, dripping with oily fluid, slowly began to emerge. Time snapped. My brain just stopped. I was looking at an impossibility, a walking violation of every natural law. That thing, wearing the skin of a man, its head twisted backwards, birthing a nightmare from its own face. The oily black leg continued to unspool from the vertical slit. It was followed by another, and another. They unfolded with a wet, popping sound, like knuckles cracking inside a glove full of grease. They were long, serrated, and razor-thin. The figure itself remained perfectly still, its body facing the panel, its inverted head staring at me with those two wet, black pits. It was a sentry. It was a gate. I had to move. I was going to die. The humming from the 9-foot purple distortion grew, shifting from a low thrum to a high-pitched, resonant whine that made my fillings ache. The air around it was becoming visibly unstable. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, they all seemed to bend towards it, their textures warping as if the hallway were being squeezed through a straw. And the skittering returned, not just in the walls. From the walls. I aimed my maglite beam up. In the ceiling, the metal grates of the air vents were bulging downwards. As I watched, one grate tore loose from its screws and clattered to the floor, followed by a shower of black, magnetic dust from the dark, rectangular hole. A mass of thin, jointed obsidian legs spilled out. They weren't a single creature. They were a colony, dozens of them, each the size of my arm, scrambling over each other. They poured onto the ceiling and down the walls, moving with a frantic, clicking skittering that echoed the earlier sounds. They weren't coming for me. Not yet. They were moving towards the purple distortion, like moths to a cancerous flame. More grates fell. The hallway was filling up. They were on the floor now, a moving, clicking carpet of black glass and oil that I had maybe 5 seconds. The figure by the panel hadn't moved. It was still unfolding. From its face, I looked at the lock. I looked at the figure. I looked at the tide of skittering legs advancing from both ends of the corridor. There was no choice. Get out of my way. I screamed, a raw, useless sound that I ran at the figure. I held the heavy triangular key in front of me, point first, a pathetic, improvised stake. The floor was slick with the oily residue from the skitterers. I nearly fell. The figure didn't react. 2 feet away. 1 foot. His black, whole eyes were fixed on me. The smell was unbearable. Like ozone and rotten meat that I was past it. I threw myself at the wall, my shoulders slamming into the main breaker panel. The ECS lock was right there, a small triangular hole. My hand was shaking so badly I couldn't fit the key in. Come on, come on. I jammed it. It wouldn't fit. The figure moved. It didn't turn its body. Its head, still upside down, snapped 180 degrees back around to face the wall with a wet pop. It was now staring at the purple distortion. The limbs that had emerged from its face retracted, disappearing back into the vertical slit with a sickening, wet zip. It had been a distraction. The back of its uniform, the gray fabric I thought was Harris's, shredded. It didn't rip. It unzipped from neck to waist. From the man-shaped shell, the real creature began to emerge. It wasn't legs. It was a single, massive, scythe-like appendage, a blade of polished black chitin, dripping with the same black fluid. It rose from the man's back, arcing high into the AI. It wasn't aiming for me. It was aiming for the lock. It swung down. A black-bladed guillotine, straight at my hand and the key. There was no time to think. Only to act. I didn't pull my hand back. I shoved it forward. With a desperate, animalistic grunt, I jammed the triangular key into the lock. It wasn't a complex mechanism. It was a pressure lock. I threw my entire body weight into it, turning it a hard 90 degrees. Click. A deep, satisfying thunk echoed from inside the breaker panel. A sound of heavy, ancient tumblers falling into place. The black scythe struck the exact spot my hand had been a millisecond before. It didn't just hit the wall. It penetrated it. The blade, impossibly sharp, sank 6 inches into the solid concrete and the metal of the breaker panel as if it were wet plaster. A spray of pulverized concrete and sparks exploded outwards. The impact threw me off my feet. I landed hard on my back, my head cracking against the linoleum. My maglite flew from my hand, skittering across the floor into the advancing tide of glassy legs. I was blind. But I could hear. The instant the key turned, the world changed. The high-pitched, resonant whine from the purple distortion didn't fade. It inverted. It became a sound I can only describe as a physical void. A low-frequency gulp that seemed to pull the very air from my lungs. The purple, swirling oval didn't just vanish. It imploded. It collapsed in on itself with the force of a detonation. A shock wave of pure, colorless pressure radiated outwards. It was not a wave of force. It was a wave of reality, of normalcy, slamming back into place. It hit the guardian creature first. The thing screamed. It wasn't a biological sound. It was a shriek of pure digital static, like 1,000 modems dying at once. The human-shaped shell it wore was blasted clean off, disintegrating into a cloud of gray dust and rags. What was underneath was, I don't have the words. It wasn't a body. It was a shape, a chaotic, impossible tangle of black, chitinous limbs, smooth obsidian plates and gaps. places where it seemed to be missing, cut out of reality. It was a living piece of geometric, three-dimensional wrongness. The scythe arm was ripped from the wall, and the entire creature was hurled backwards, slamming into the far end of the corridor. Then the wave hit the colonies. The skittering tide of black legs was vaporized. They didn't die. They didn't scurry. They were just unmade. The wave passed over them, and they dissolved into a fine, oily black mist that hung in the air for a second before vanishing. The hallway was instantly, utterly clean. And then, silence. A thick, ringing, profound silence. The buzzing of the lights, the clicking, the humming, all gone. I lay on my back, gasping, my ears screaming. The air was still freezing, but the painful, unnatural cold was gone. It was just cold. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. My head throbbed. At the far end of the hall, the guardian creature was twitching. It was a mangled heap of black, glassy angles. It was broken. It was dying. I had done it. I had closed the channel. I staggered to my feet, using the wall for support. I had to get out. I just had to walk down the hall and out the main exit. I fumbled in the dark for my mag light, found it near the wall. I clicked it on. The beam was a welcome, normal sight. I turned back towards my control room, just to check. And my heart stopped. The ECS had worked. The purple distortion in the hall was gone. The Guardian was broken. The skitterers were erased. But the 5x5-foot square hole in my server room, it was still there. Perfect, silent, square of absolute black. I had closed the channel. I had hung up the call. I had shut down the signal that was letting them in. I hadn't closed the door. And from the absolute darkness of that hole, something new was happening. Not a sound. Not a creature. A light. A faint, pale, and horribly familiar white light was beginning to glow deep, deep down in the darkness. It was the color of the thermal image, the color of the freezing figure in the field, the figure from Zone 7, the anchor Harris had been talking about. The anchor was loose, and now it was coming up. I stood there, paralyzed, 1 foot in the hallway, 1 in the control room. The broken, twitching body of the Guardian was 20 feet to my left. The main exit was 30 feet past that. Behind me in the control room was the hole, and the light. It was a cold, sterile operating room white. It didn't cast shadows. It erased them. It was growing brighter, steadily, not with a flicker, but with the smooth, inevitable push of a hydraulic press. And the cold. It was back. But it wasn't the chaotic, negative space cold of the distortion. This was a primordial cold. The cold of a dead star. The cold of the absolute zero between realities. It poured from the hole, and this time, the frost wasn't a delicate lace that IT was building. The floor around the 5x5 hole was now a solid, opaque block of ice. The ice was climbing, growing up the walls, encasing the dead server racks. It was a glacier, being born in fast motion, and my control room was its cradle. The ice cracked and groaned. The sound of a living, expanding thing. My adrenaline was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow dread. The anchor is loose. Harris's words. I finally understood. The 11 signals, the harmony, they weren't a test. They weren't a signal we were sending. They were a cage of sound, designed to hold the anchor, to drown it out, to jam its frequency. The skitterers, the Guardian, the purple distortion, they were just interference. Opportunists, drawn to the chaotic noise of the failing cage. By turning the ECS key, I hadn't locked the door. I had just silenced the alarms. I had stopped the jamming signal that I had in my desperation, closed the channel, leaving the main line wide, completely and silently open. The white light in the hole was now as bright as a welding arc. I couldn't look directly at it. The entire control room was illuminated in its flat, dead white glare. The expanding ice had reached the main console, swallowing it in a thick, translucent cocoon at a new sound. Not from the ice, from the hole. It was the sound of something immense and brittle shifting down in the dark. And then, a hand.it rose from the illuminated blackness. It was not a hand of flesh or bone, or even the black chitin of the Guardian. It was smooth, white, and featureless, like a mannequin's hand carved from unpolished marble. It was enormous. The fingers alone were 3 feet long. It gripped the edge of the hole. The newly formed ice hissed and receded from its touch, vaporizing into steam. The hand was a source of anti-cold, a paradox of absolute zero that burned. At a second hand, identical, rose up and gripped the other side of the hole. I had to run. The exit was down the hall. But to get to the hall, I had to run past the control room doorway. I had to run past it. It began to pull itself up. I didn't wait. I screamed, a thin, dry sound, and sprinted. I ran for the hallway, my boots slipping on the frozen floor. I didn't look into the control room. Couldn't. I just needed to get past the doorway. But I saw it. I saw it from the corner of my eye. The head rose above the floor level. It was exactly as I had seen it on the Zone 7 monitor. Massive, smooth, a blank, white, featureless expanse, like a porcelain mask the size of a tombstone. No eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just a perfect, terrible, cold whiteness. I burst into the hallway, scrambling on all fours. I felt a wave of its presence, a psychic pressure of pure, ancient silence. I got to my feet and looked at the Guardian's body, a broken pile of black angles. I had to get past it. I took one step, then paused, a fatal human curiosity. I looked back. The control room was gone. The doorway was a solid, glowing white wall of ice. But the thing wasn't inside. It was standing in the hallway. It had passed through the ice wall as if it were fog. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its head was scraping the ceiling, 12 feet up. Its body was a long, graceful, flowing shape of the same porcelain white material, less a body and more a robed, static-filled absence. It stood over the broken, twitching remains of the Black Guardian. It didn't look at me. It slowly tilted, its blank face down as if contemplating the dead creature. It raised one of its massive 3-fingered hands. Then, with a slow, deliberate, almost gentle motion, it pressed its hand onto the Guardian. There was no sound, no flash. The Guardian, the impossible, chaotic thing of black chitin, just ceased. It didn't vaporize. It was unwritten. The spot where it lay was now just clean, empty linoleum. The anchor had erased it, and then, with the slow, inevitable grace of a falling moon, the tall, white, silent thing began to turn its featureless face towards me. There was no sound as it turned. It was a movement of pure geometry. The featureless white mask, as large as a car door, was now perfectly aligned with me. I was not, in that moment, afraid. I was beyond fear. I was a particle, a speck of dust, held in the gaze of a star. The feeling it radiated was not anger. It wasn't malice. It was finality. The fluorescent lights in the hallway, the ones that hadn't passed yet, didn't flicker. They just went out. The light was not blocked. It was drunk. The metal fixtures, the wires, the bulbs themselves were instantly coated in the same thick, white, vaporizing frost that now filled the control room. The only light in the corridor was the one emanating from the anchor itself. It was not a warm light. It was a dead, flat illumination that had no source and cast no shadows. It was the light of an X-ray. I tried to raise my mag light, but my arm wouldn't obey. I tried to scream, but my lungs wouldn't draw air. I was pinned in place, not by a physical force, but by a total, suffocating presence. It had stopped the world around me. And then, It spoke. It did not make a sound. There was no telepathy. It was a thought placed directly into the center of my brain. It felt like a smooth, cold stone had been dropped into my consciousness. It wasn't a voice. It was a knowing that I suddenly saw, not with my eyes, but in my mind, an image of the entire facility. The 12 zones scattered across the continent. But they weren't graphs. They were points. 11 of them were red, chaotic, and shrieking. A net of frantic, buzzing energy. And in the center, trapped, was one single, pure, white point that I saw the harmony. It was a cage, a vibrational prison woven from 11 threads of manufactured infrasonic chaos, all designed to do one thing: hold the 12th, the white one, in place. Then I saw myself. I saw my hand on the console, calibrating, mending the net when it frayed. I saw myself, just moments ago, jamming the ECS key into the lock. I saw the key turn, and I saw the 11 red threads snap. The white point, the anchor, was free. The cold stone in my head pulsed with a feeling. It was a feeling of release, a feeling of gratitude. It wasn't a monster trapped in a system. It was the system, the facility, harmonic geodynamics, Harris, my entire job. We were not the jailers. We were the anchor. We were the tiny, insignificant point of reality that it had been chained to. And I, the subacoustic monitor, had just let it go. The anchor took a step. It didn't move like a living thing. It flowed like a glacier in motion. It glided over the floor, and the floor ceased to exist beneath it. It left a trail, a scar of pure, black, absolute nothing, a gouge in the very fabric of the hallway. It was not coming for me. It was not even aware of me any more than I am aware of the individual atoms in the air I walk through. It was just leaving. It was heading for the main exit. It was heading for the outside world. It glided past me, not 2 feet away. The cold was so profound that I felt the moisture in my eyeballs begin to crystallize. The dead white of its robe filled my vision, and then it was past me that I fell to my knees, gasping, the paralysis broken. Air, cold and sharp, flooded my lungs. I was alive. I was irrelevant. I watched its towering, silent, white back as it glided down the final 30 feet of the corridor. It reached the main exit. 2 heavy, steel fire doors. It did not open them. It did not break them. It passed through them. And the doors, the concrete frame, the exit sign above them, they were erased from reality, leaving only a perfect, 12-foot-tall, featureless white archway of frost, opening up into the pre-dawn darkness of the outside world. I was alone. The facility was dead. The nightmare was over. And then my intranet phone, buried under a foot of ice in the control room, suddenly shrieked to life. It wasn't Harris. It was a new voice, crisp and cold and panicked. Monitor, monitor, do you copy? The anchor is loose. Zone 7 is dark. You must initiate Protocol Omega. Do you copy? You have to retune it. You have to call it back. Call it back. I whispered, my voice a dry croak. The words from the intranet speaker were insane. Call that back. I was kneeling on the frozen, scarred linoleum, staring at the glowing white archway where the exit doors used to be. The night air, the smell of pine and cold asphalt, was drifting in. It was the first real, outside air I'd smelled in 3 years. Monitor, confirm Protocol Omega. The failure is cascading. Zone 3 is dark. Zone 9 is dark. They are all going dark. You are the only node left. The voice was high, frantic, and laced with a digital static I recognized. It was the sound of the channel breaking down. I staggered to my feet. My body ached with a cold so deep it felt like it was in my marrow. There is no protocol. I screamed back at the frozen, ice-entombed control room. It's gone. I let it go. It's over. Negative monitor. You don't understand. The voice shrieked, the signal degrading with every word. The harmony wasn't a cage. It was a counterbalance. The 12 zones, they hold each other in. The speaker cut out, replaced by a deafening, final hiss silence. The only sound was the wind, whistling through the new white, frozen archway. A counterbalance. I repeated to myself, the words feeling hollow. I stumbled back into the control room, my boots crunching on the supernatural ice. The place was a tomb. The console was a block of white, opaque frost. But the monitors, the 11 screens that had shown the sine waves, they were dead, black, lifeless, and cracked by the cold. All except one. Monitor 7. The thermal feed. It was still on. The ice hadn't touched it. It was glowing, not with the cold, white light of the anchor, but with a faint, familiar greenish-black tint. The thermal feed. But it wasn't the field. I wiped the frost from the edges of the screen with my glove. My breath caught in my throat. The camera wasn't pointing at a field. It was pointing down, from a high corner of the room. It was looking at the control room, my control room. And I was in it. I was a tiny, fuzzy, cold blue shape, standing in the middle of the frame, looking up at the screen. What? Zone 7 is weird, I remembered saying. It's the only one with a camera. It was never a field. The field was a loop, a digital mask. The Zone 7 sensor. It had been pointed at me the entire time. Harris's last, mangled words came back to me. We aren't the ones listening. We are the signal. I looked at the screen at my own cold blue image, and then on the screen I saw something else move. Behind my own image in the dark hallway. A shape. A tall, white, glowing hot shape on the thermal feed. But the anchor was cold. It was absolute zero. Should have been black. Stark, freezing black. I spun around. The hallway was empty. The white, frosted archway stood silent. I turned back to the screen. The glowing hot, white figure on the thermal camera was still there. In the hallway, staring at me, and I finally understood. The anchor wasn't the white figure. The white figure wasn't the monster. The white figure was the counterbalance. It was the harmony. It was the other anchor, drawn to the failure. The thing I thought was the monster. It was the cure. Then, what? I looked at my own hands. The skin felt tight, numb. I looked back at the screen, at my own cold blue image. The anchor wasn't the thing in the field. The anchor wasn't the white thing. The anchor was Zone 7. The anchor is loose, Harris had said. I looked at my cold blue image on the screen, and as I watched, my image flickered. For one split second it was gone. And in its place, just for a frame, was the other image. The one I had seen on the monitors when the signal flatlined. A towering, impossibly tall, freezing cold figure. I was the monitor. I was the jailer. And I was the prisoner. The entire facility was a machine built around me to keep me, to keep me stable. And I had just broken my own cage. The internet speaker crackled one last time. It wasn't the frantic man. It was Harris's voice. The original, dead recording. Do not investigate. I looked down at my hands. They were pale. So very, very pale. The cold wasn't around me anymore. It was in me. It was me. And from deep within my own chest, I heard and felt a new sound. A low, slow, powerful thump. A sound I hadn't heard in 3 years. The sound of my own, inhuman, stable, beating heart.